Welcome, focused learners. If you're an ambitious student gunning for the IITs, or a driven professional navigating India's ultra-competitive corporate world right now, you've probably spent some time wondering what truly separates the absolute best from the rest of the pack. Well, today we are diving into a deep explainer of Malcolm Gladwell's massive bestseller, Outliers, and we're also going to look at some of its sharpest modern critiques to map out the real architecture of achievement. So let's start by challenging a deeply ingrained belief. Think about it for a second. Do successful people actually make it alone? We live in a culture that absolutely loves the solo hustle. We celebrate self-made billionaires and the idea of the lone genius conquering the world against all odds. But is that really how it works? In Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell completely shatters this self-made myth. He argues that, honestly, no one ever makes it alone. Highly successful people, they're really just the visible tip of a massive iceberg of hidden advantages. Their success isn't just a product of their own making. It's deeply tied to the specific world they grew up in, the unique opportunities they were handed, and, as you'll see, the exact timing of their lives. To really understand how these hidden advantages compound over time, we first have to look at something called the Matthew effect. This is a concept from sociology that describes accumulated advantage, basically the idea that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And you see this everywhere. Think of it like early foundation batches for our own competitive exams. Those kids who gain just a tiny early advantage get placed in the top batches, right? They get better resources, better teachers. Meanwhile, those who fall behind early on find it almost impossible to ever catch up. Gladwell brilliantly proves this using Canadian youth hockey. See, the age cutoff for youth hockey leagues there is January 1st. This means a kid born on January 1st is playing against kids born in December of that exact same year. And at a young age, an 11-month gap in physical maturity is massive. Because the older kids are larger and more coordinated, they get identified as talented. So they get moved to elite teams, receive better coaching, and practice way more. Literally, an arbitrary cutoff date turns a small initial age gap into a lifetime advantage. It's exactly like how early physical selection for under 14 cricket academies here can define a player's entire athletic career. And this compounding advantage builds directly into what is arguably Gladwell's most famous concept, the 10,000-hour rule. Achieving true world-class expertise in any complex skill requires a simply enormous amount of time, specifically around 10,000 hours of practice. But here is the real catch. How do you even get the chance to practice for that long in the first place? Gladwell argues that world-class expertise requires this huge time investment, but outliers like the Beatles or computer pioneer Bill Joy were simply lucky enough to get the opportunity to actually put those hours in. Take Bill Gates, for example. He gained incredibly rare access to a high school time-sharing computer back in 1968 when he was just 13 years old. Without that extremely rare access, his genius might never have materialized into a $50 billion empire. He didn't just have talent, he had the ultimate structural advantage. And the reality of that practice? It usually wasn't glamorous. The Beatles weren't just happily jamming in a cozy garage. They were forced to play grueling 8-hour sets in Hamburg, Germany, often in strip clubs. It was this intense, forced repetition of over 1,200 live shows between 1960 and 1964 that completely forged their unique sound and gave them the sheer confidence to dominate the world stage. Now, you might be thinking, what about raw genius? Well, raw intelligence isn't enough either. Take Christopher Langan. The guy has an IQ of 195. That's literally higher than Einstein's. Yet, he ended up working on a horse farm. Why? Because he grew up in a destitute, dysfunctional environment and was never taught how to navigate the world. On the flip side, look at J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb. He grew up in immense wealth with what sociologists call concerted cultivation. When he faced a major crisis, like actually trying to poison his tutor at Cambridge, he used his cultivated social skills to talk his way out of being expelled. It's a pretty powerful reminder that practical intelligence and a nurturing environment almost always beat pure, raw genius. Then there's the elements of pure timing. Just look at the birth years of tech titans like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. They were all born right around 1955, and that is not a coincidence. It made them the exact perfect age, around 20 or 21, when the personal computer revolution truly kicked off in 1975. If they were born 10 years earlier or 10 years later, they would have missed the wave entirely. We see this exact same phenomenon with the founders of India's IT boom, perfectly timed to ride the globalization wave of the 1990s. Furthermore, Gladwell highlights how our cultural legacies heavily dictate our success. For instance, The grueling, disciplined nature of Asian agriculture, which required thousands of hours of intense labor, instilled a profound cultural work ethic that translates directly into modern academic success. And we see this exact same intense cultural drive in our own education systems today, right? Where sheer time spent in developmental, nurturing environments correlates with massive academic leaps. Section 2. Was Gladwell wrong? Let's take a look at the limits of the 10,000-hour rule and environmental determinism. Interestingly, even the people Gladwell used as his prime examples had their doubts. Paul McCartney himself pushed back against the 10,000-hour rule. He basically said, look, hard work was absolutely in the background of their success, for sure. But there were plenty of other bands putting in the exact same grueling hours in Hamburg who never made it. Hard work is a prerequisite, yes, but it is definitely not a guarantee. And the data actually backs McCartney up perfectly here. A massive meta-analysis reviewing over 9,000 research papers on deliberate practice found that deliberate practice explains only 26% of success in games, 21% in music, and incredibly, less than 1% of the variance in the professional world. Let that sink in. Practice absolutely matters, but it's not the magic mathematical formula we really want it to be. In fact, over-indexing on the belief that raw hours equal success has a really dark side. We see this in karoshi, the Japanese term for literally death by overwork. We also see it in the brutal 9-9-6 schedule in China, working 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week, leaving virtually zero time for an actual life. And for Indian professionals, this probably sounds super familiar, echoing our own intense debates lately over the toxic expectations of 70-hour work weeks. Yet despite all of that, some still strongly champion this extreme grind. Tech leaders like Alibaba founder Jack Ma have heavily promoted the 996 culture to beat economic rivals. The expectation is intense loyalty, subordination, and endless unpaid overtime from their workforce, essentially equating immense personal sacrifice directly with both corporate, individual, and success. But guess what? We're now seeing a massive modern pushback against this rat race from a younger generation. In China, millennials are joining the lying flat movement, protesting the exploitative work week by just doing the bare minimum. Over in Korea, professionals are becoming voluntary outsiders, actively minimizing work interactions to protect their mental health. They're making a choice to work to live, prioritizing their health and actively rejecting the Gladwellian grind. This pushback leads us to a much deeper, more philosophical critique of Gladwell by thinkers like Tom Butler-Bowden. He points out a major flaw in Outliers. Gladwell sort of treats humans almost like Pavlovian dogs, right? As if we are merely reacting to our environment and timing. But that ignores the very essence of humanity, our ability to adapt, our resilience, and our profound capacity to just surprise people. A famous Harvard longitudinal study led by George Valian actually proved that it wasn't the obstacles or advantages themselves that determined success. It was the individual's unpredictable adaptation to them. Serial entrepreneurs succeed by finding value where others absolutely refuse to look. Even Gladwell's own examples, like the lawyer Joseph Flom, ultimately succeeded because they actively asserted themselves. Human agency and the imagination to actively shape the world around you still deeply matter. So we're left with a pretty powerful contrast. On one side, you have the environmental view. We are merely the lucky products of our specific community and timing. But on the other side, the alternative view. Unusual people have the fierce will to transcend their background, taking whatever circumstances they are handed and actively shaping their times. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this thought. Success is never completely self-made, but it's also never completely predetermined either. It's a dance between the era you happen to be born into and the vision you hold in your mind. So what will you build with the unique advantages you've been given and the unbreakable agency you possess? Thank you so much for exploring this with us, and keep pushing forward.